We're ready to start? Okay, so today is August 10th, 2019. Let me just clear my throat. Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Okay, so we are continuing now with the reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Threes, and now we come to Sutta number 109. So this is a sutta addressed by the Buddha to Anathapindika, and so this is concerned first of all with proper conduct, and then at the very end it relates proper conduct to death, to the need to undergo a good death. Okay, so the sutta begins by saying, when the mind is unprotected, bodily, verbal, and mental actions are unprotected. And actually the sutta, a little strangely, it uses 2 words to designate action. The 2 words are closely connected. One is the word kamma, which here is being taken not in the sense in which we ordinarily understand karma as a force leading to rebirth, but karma simply in the sense of action or deeds. And then the other word is kamanta, which has almost the same meaning. So it's a bit of a puzzle to me why the sutta should use 2 different words. But anyway, that's the way it's formulated. Oh, I see that. This one? Yes. Okay. Okay, so when bodily, verbal, and mental, when the mind is unprotected, then bodily, verbal, and mental actions are unprotected. So, in a way, there's a certain redundancy here, since mental actions are the expressions of states of mind. So we could say that the mind is the source of bodily action and verbal action. That's pretty clear. But the mind, we could say, is the source of thoughts, and volitions, intentions, plans, desires, which we could say are comprised under mental actions. So the basic point of the sutta, or of the statement, is very much similar to that of the opening verse of the Dhammapada, where it says, Mano pubhangama dhamma, mano seta, mano maya, manasa cha badutena, basati va karoti va, tato nang dukkhamanveti, chakam va vahato padam. So the opening verse of the Dhammapada says that of all Dhammas, mind is the forerunner, mind is the chief, they are all made by mind. But then it goes on to say, if one speaks or acts with a defiled mind, then suffering follows, just as the wheel follows the foot of the ox. So in that statement, mind is separated out and made the source of bodily action and of speech. But in this sutta, mind is the source not only of bodily action, not only of verbal action, but also of mental action. And so this, we could say this statement is taking all of our activities, bodily, verbal, and mental, and tracing them back to the state of mind, the quality of the mind, as the source of those actions. Okay, so, and then the key word here is unprotected. And so this is the negation of protected. And so what does it mean to protect one's bodily, verbal, and mental actions? It means to protect the mind. And how does one protect the mind? That's the question. How does one protect the mind? Do you hire a security guard? Do you equip yourself with weapons, so if any, or a security alarm?
Bhante, maybe working to keep lobha, dosa, moha out of the mind as possible.
Say again.
Working to keep lobha, dosha, and moha out of the mind as possible.
So yeah, so one way to protect the mind, to keep lobha, dosa, moha out of the mind, to protect the mind from, let's say, invasions by greed, hatred, and delusion. Any other ideas? How to protect the mind? Take the microphone.
To take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha.
Well, maybe that's a bit more religious than necessary. Let's speak in more direct, practical terms. Okay, I think that's Andrea with the back.
It would depend on the circumstance of death. Not everybody could do it, but in a practical way, one could try to concentrate on the breath, or I'm just being very practical. Okay. Concentrate on something so that the mind isn't going places, like you said, just to try to actually do that.
Yeah. Okay,
one could do a mantra, one could be religious or non-religious about it, but it would be to try to concentrate.
Okay.
To keep the mind clear.
Yeah. And Johnny?
Ante, I think it's got the sense though with mindfulness.
Okay, actually, the key word that I was looking for is mindfulness. So to be mindful of one's state of mind.
I want to share that my wife reminds me every day.
Yeah, so to be mindful of the state of mind, so that when one sees greed, hatred, or anger, and delusion arising, starting to arise, then one can check the mind so that preventing it from getting overrun, coming under the control of greed, hate, delusion. You were going to add something else? Oh, okay. Okay. So, yeah, we can say what works together with mindfulness is the quality called sampajanya, clear comprehension. So we can say mindfulness is what makes one aware of the mind. Or mindfulness is, you could say, is the attention directed to the state of mind. Clear comprehension, sampajanya, understands, identifies the state of mind. And then something else comes in to protect the mind. You could say that mindfulness is like the lookout guard, but one needs a sort of big, burly, strong guy. The bouncer, like the bouncer in the bar. Who is the bouncer of the mind?
Is it non-hate, non-greed,
No,
non-delusion? No.
strong, tough guy that throws out the invaders?
Is it concentration, Bhante?
No, no. Maybe take the microphone.
Observe the precept.
Oh, Sila, you were saying. That's maybe a way to protect bodily, verbal, and mental action. But I want the bouncer in the mind. Just like the bouncer throws troublemakers out of the bar or out of the meeting hall.
Immunogenicity of the mind.
The,
Immunogenicity, I can't pronounce it correct. The brightness of the mind.
no, it's something very simple. No, wisdom is already, you could say, included, I already included that under sampajanya, clear comprehension. So we have clear comprehension, mindfulness, observing the precepts is a starting point. Anybody else want to take, we'll take one more guess. It's a tough guy. Exactly. Energy or right effort. Or you could say diligence. Yeah. So one of the functions of energy is to expel arisen unwholesome states and to prevent the arising of unarisen unwholesome states.
But Bhante, is it like the sutra using mind to crush mind?
Well, that's an application of energy, but we don't have to reach that stage of extreme vigorous action. But even in the early stages, one uses energy just to keep a watch, well, mindfulness keeps the watch over the mind, but uses energy to prevent unwholesome states from arising and to drive out, like the bouncer pushes the troublemaker out of the meeting hall. So energy pushes the unwholesome states out of the mind. Okay, so continuing. Okay, for one whose bodily, verbal, and mental deeds are unprotected, bodily, so this is the initial stage. The deeds are unprotected, there's no mindfulness, no clear comprehension. Then bodily, verbal, and mental actions become tainted. This is the translation used here, tainted. We look at the Pali word here. Let's go up. Can you, okay, let me try it this way. Okay, the Pali word here that's rendered as tainted is avasutta, which is, it's a past participle of a verb, avasavati, which is based on the verb savati, which means to flow. And so another noun that we often come across in the early Buddhist texts, based on the same verb, savati, to flow, is the noun asava. So the asavas are those defilements that flow into the mind, or that flow out from the mind through the senses. And so here, in this sutta, we can see that when bodily, verbal, and mental deeds are unprotected, then the bodily, verbal, and mental deeds become tainted. And this seems to be, we could see from the simile that will come later, this is sort of implicitly using the image of like the walls of a house, maybe the ceiling and the walls of a house, which get flooded with water or moistened with water, sort of seeped with water. And then it said, for one whose bodily, verbal, and mental deeds become tainted, bodily, verbal, and mental deeds become rotten. So it's just like if you have a house and then there's a leak and the water, when it rains, the water comes in and sort of seeps into the ceiling and to the walls of the house. So then after some time, the walls of the house, the ceiling and the walls start to become, what do you say happens? Sodden, soggy, but then they start to pick up this like moldy, maybe that's the word that I want, like moldy. And so it becomes like unsafe, to, especially if you have allergies, to stay in the house, because if you get an allergic reaction, then it can have a negative impact on one's health. Okay, so one's bodily, verbal, and mental actions, in this case, become rotten. They're starting to decay. Yeah, that's the image, that of decaying substance of the walls and ceiling. And so similarly, one's actions now have become rotten. And then comes, this I think is the key sentence of the sutta, one whose bodily, verbal, and mental deeds become rotten will not have a good death. Yeah, so what exactly does this mean, not having a good death? I think the note is not really, yeah, actually, it's just, the note says just that the Pali uses two terms for death. Okay, so what does it mean to have a bad death? Two aspects I'm thinking of in relation to a bad death. So what would those two aspects be? Yep. Just take a guess. Don't worry, you're not getting marked on for a final grade. What does one want to avoid?
Well, I mean, one bad thing would be to just be locked in a spiral of regret or bitterness or, hatred as one is dying. That is not a good mind state in which to be.
Yeah. Okay.
Or sad or anything negative is basically what I'm trying
So
to
that's one aspect that I had in mind. So I would say dying in a state of confusion, anger, resentment, fear, panic.
Any of those things are not good.
Yeah. So all of those I comprise under the first aspect. The second aspect, not so immediately psychological. See, exactly. Okay, take the microphone and say that out loud so that it gets...
Rebirth in a lower destination.
Okay, so you could say a bad rebirth in a bad destination. And so when one engages in repeated bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct, so that the actions become tainted and rotten, then when death takes place, probably one of those unwholesome karmas is going to come up to govern the rebirth process to a bad rebirth. Okay, so that takes care of the first part of the sutta. And then the Buddha illustrates this with a simile. Again, this is a simile that I already used. When a house with a peaked roof is badly thatched, then the roof peak, the rafters, and the walls are unprotected. Then the roof peak, the rafters, the walls become tainted. The roof peak, the rafters and the walls become rotten. And when the roof, the rafters, and the walls become rotten, it's even possible that if a strong wind blows, the house is going to collapse. Okay, then comes the positive side. Okay, so when the mind is protected, so you could say protected by mindfulness, clear comprehension, and energy, then bodily, verbal, and mental actions are protected. When the actions are protected, they don't become tainted. And they don't become tainted, they don't become rotten. And one whose bodily, verbal, and mental deeds do not become rotten will have a good death. So what are the characteristics of a good death, desirable death?
The mind is wholesome.
Okay, wholesome.
And destination with the Dharma,
Destination
with the Buddhist Dharma.
with the Buddhist Dharma.
Yes, I would consider that as a good destination.
Well, usually there are other terms for a good destination. What would you say? Just say it quickly. Okay, yeah, a good rebirth. Or if one has really developed strongly these 4 foundations of mindfulness or the 7 factors of enlightenment, there can even come the breakthrough at the time of death to one of the stages of realization, even arhatship. Okay, so that is Sutta number 109. 110 is almost the same, it just uses different terms, but the basic point is the same. Yeah.
Quick question, Bante. So, when there's bodily, verbal, and mental actions,
Yeah.
karma, is there like a gradation, like the bodily and the verbal is like a higher level of karma versus the mental karma is lower, or are they about the same?
I don't think one could rank them in that way. Yeah, I would say it changes very much according to circumstances.
Right. So,
Okay, but let us say the case where I have the intention to kill somebody, but I don't actually undertake the action. In that case, of course, I'm getting only a weaker karma of intention to kill, but since I don't engage in the action, the karma of that thought is not as severe as the karma generated by the action of killing.
yeah.
Okay, if, let us say, on the one hand, I give a command to somebody, instructions, kill that person. On the other hand, I do the act of killing myself. I can't say that physically doing the act of killing is necessarily heavier than giving instructions to somebody else to perform the act of killing. And then there could be mental actions. In fact, there are some suttas where the Buddha says that if one grasps a wrong view, that could have extremely heavy karmic consequences, which could be heavier than maybe a bodily action like slapping and killing a mosquito. Okay, any other questions arising out of this? Okay, then let us go on to the next sutta. Now we come to 111. In a way, the sutta repeats things that we've already come across, but we'll take a look at it and see if there's anything that needs explanation. Okay, so we have here three causes for the origination of karma. Let's see the word that's used for causes. I think the word is nidana. Yes, three nidanas for the, so these are three causes for the origination, samudaya, of karmas. So the three, we know the three unwholesome roots, the three unwholesome causes: greed, hatred, and delusion. Okay, then any karma which is motivated by greed, born of greed, caused by greed, originating from greed, is unwholesome. Yeah, this we could say unwholesome. Yeah, the Pali word, of course, is a kusala. And the word kusala is an Indian usage, regular Indian usage. It's related to health. So somebody who is in good health is said to be kusala. Somebody in bad health is akusala. So we could say that calling the action, the karma, unwholesome means that it's unhealthy, an unhealthy action. And it's arisen from an unhealthy cause. Then calling it blameworthy, savaja, I would say indicates the moral perspective on the action. And then saying that the action results in suffering, this is dukkha vipaka, that it ripens in suffering. This highlights the karmic aspect of the action. So with these three statements, if you just look at them superficially, you'll think that they're saying exactly the same thing. But actually they are highlighting the unwholesome action, or the action born of greed, from three different perspectives. From the what I'll call the psychological aspect, calling it unwholesome means that it's a psychologically unhealthy or harmful, inwardly harmful state. Calling it blameworthy means that it's ethically impure, ethically bad state. And saying that it results in suffering shows the karmic consequence of that action. And then this is the additional statement, that this karma leads to the origination of action, not to the cessation of action, to the cessation of karma. And then the commentary here explains that this karma brings the origination or accumulation of other karma leading back to the round of rebirths. Vattagami karma, I think it is. Okay, so the same is said about karma born of greed, born of hatred, born of delusion. Okay, and so all karma born of greed, hatred, and delusion is criticized first from these three perspectives, and then this karma is said to lead to the origination of more karma. Okay, now the text speaks about three other causes for the origination of karma. So these three are non-greed. Actually, first it says, interesting, three causes for the origination of karma. So these three are non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. They're said to be causes for the origination of karma. But then it's said that any karma that's arisen from non-greed, born of non-greed, and so on. Okay, first, it's wholesome, psychologically healthy. It's blameless, looked at from the moral point of view. beyond reproach, irreproachable, pure, praiseworthy, and then it results in happiness. When that karma comes to maturity, it brings pleasure or happiness. And then it said, this karma leads to the cessation of karma, not to the origination of karma. So it's a bit strange, maybe contradictory. The sutta seems to be contradicting itself. So it says that each of these is a cause for the origination of karma, but then it says that this karma leads to the cessation of karma, not to the origination of karma. I know, what are we going to make of that? I looked at the commentary to this, and it's not especially helpful. Okay, so I give my thoughts on this. Okay, first I say that there's a distinction between the unwholesome types of karma and the wholesome types. So unwholesome karma inevitably it leads to more karma. And then when it gets the opportunity to bring rebirth, it brings a bad rebirth. And it maintains bondage. So that unwholesome karma keeps one in bondage to the cycle of repeated birth and death. Okay, now with wholesome karma, there is a distinction between two kinds of wholesome karma. So you call one maybe mundane wholesome karma, and the other maybe liberating or world transcending wholesome karma. Okay, mundane wholesome karma. So this is the karma that is generated by engaging in acts, we could call this acts of merit. So this we could also call meritorious karma, or mundane meritorious karma. So this is the karma generated by acts of practicing giving, generosity, observing precepts, maybe undertaking devotional practices, doing some of the beautiful meditations like the Brahma Viharas, the meditation on loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity, and doing this for the purpose or with the intention of achieving a favorable rebirth, a happy rebirth. And so this is wholesome karma, which will produce a desirable result, but because the person is still attached to continued existence, their wholesome karma will just lead to new actions, new activities, generating more wholesome karma, leading to another happy rebirth. But from time to time, if they're not mindful and clearly comprehending, not protecting the mind, if the mind gets overcome by greed, hate, and delusion, then they might engage in moral transgression of body, speech, and thought, and then they'll generate unwholesome karma, which will lead down to a bad rebirth. So this is the mundane wholesome karma. And then the world transcending wholesome karma can be the same deeds that we call meritorious deeds. One can be practicing giving, generosity, observing the precepts, the devotional meditations, the Brahma Vihara meditations, but dedicating the merit not to a happy rebirth as such, but dedicating the merit to liberation from the cycle. There are some beautiful verses, I should have looked them up before this class, that occur in a work called the Nidesa. Let me see if I could find them very quickly. So I quoted them in the Tiki-nipata commentary. Yeah, okay, this is the verses that they're looking for. Okay, the wise do not give gifts for the bliss of acquisitions. Acquisitions are, the accumulation of, let's say, material benefits, nor for the sake of renewed existence. Surely they give gifts for an end to renewed existence, for the destruction of sensuality and acquisitions. So even the practice of giving, if one follows the way of meritorious action, then one will practice giving for the sake of a happy rebirth in the future. But one could also practice giving not for the sake of a happy rebirth, but dedicating the merits, directing the merits to the end of renewed existence. And even to jhanas. So the wise do not develop jhanas for the bliss of acquisitions, nor for the sake of renewed existence. Surely they develop jhanas for the end to renewed existence, for the destruction of sensuality and acquisitions, desiring quenching, that's nibbana. They give gifts with minds so inclined, resolved upon that. As rivers approach the ocean, they take nibbana as their destination. Okay, so the world transcending wholesome karma can be like ordinary meritorious actions, like giving, observing precepts, even attaining the jhanas, but turning the mind over to liberation, directing these practices to liberation. But then there can also be the world transcending wholesome karma, which is specifically designed to bring liberation. And this would be the practices like the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the Noble Eightfold Path. So even though those can be practiced in order to create wholesome karma for the sake of merit, but their intended purpose is lokuttara, the transcending of the world. Okay, so what I would say is that first, it's the mundane karma that's arisen from non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, that's wholesome, blameless, and results in happiness that leads to a happiness in the future, to a happy rebirth, and to the accumulation of more wholesome karma. But one could also do deeds maybe even the same deeds, born of non-greed, non-hate, non-delusion, and then turn them over, direct them towards the cessation of karma, towards breaking the cycle of karma and its fruit, not for originating more wholesome karma in the future. Okay, maybe I'll ask, since this is a rather pithy sutta, though short, if there's any questions. Yeah, please.
Bhante, so when you do a good karma,
Yeah.
and if you are not thinking of it as a meritorious karma or a world transcending karma, what happens?
Yes, if you do an ordinary karma without thinking of directing it in a particular way, I think then it just falls into the category of mundane, wholesome karma.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yeah. So I think to become part of the call it the equipment or the accumulations for liberation, it has to be accompanied by that intention. Yeah, please.
Bhante, if someone with a good intention but guided by a wrong teacher with wrong will, to an extreme angular manner of think killing 100 people that will get liberated. It's a good intention.
But if it's a wrong deed?
Good intention but guided by a wrong will, like offering livestock to the Buddha is the intention was to offer, but was guided by a wrong will.
Probably one would have to look at this from an analytical perspective and look like the intention is that of giving. So that intention of giving will generate wholesome karma, I would say. But because the view is wrong, the action itself would be wrong. So that would be creating unwholesome karma. That would be my guess. Okay, you're wrong. Yeah.
Monday, does the intention that you're talking about here occur prior to the action? Or can it be an intention separate from the creation of that action?
I'm not quite sure that I understand.
For example, every time we do an action, and
Yeah.
if I'm a very well meditated person, I can see my intention prior to me taking the action.
Yeah.
So is that intention we're talking about here, or is it something like we do a chanting, let's say, and then we have a transference of merit
I see.
at the end?
I see.
Which one does it count?
I see. What's generally said is that one should generate the wholesome intention at 3 times. They speak about 3 times before. This is said specifically with the practice of giving. So one generates, before giving the gift, one generates call it the joy of giving, before one actually makes the act of giving. Then as one is performing the act of giving, one rejoices in the action as one is performing it. And then after the action, one sort of reflects back and then generates joy by reflecting on one's act of giving. So one maintains, you could say here, one is maintaining the intention at 3 periods of time, prior to the deed, while doing the deed, and after one does the deed.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, so let's go to the next sutta, again, which is concerned, the theme is that of causes for action. This is a little difficult one. Okay. So there are these three causes for the origination of karma. Okay, so here the causes are actually not the psychological factors in the mind, but rather the periods of time through which the karma originates. Okay, so the first, desire arises with reference to things in the past that are the basis for desire and lust, or desire and attachment, chandaraga. Desire arises with reference to things in the future that are the basis for desire and lust. And desire arises with reference to things in the present that are the basis for desire and lust. So here, actually, from the psychological standpoint, there's only one factor being highlighted. That is chandaraga. Those are actually two terms for one mental state. That mental state is craving or greed, but it's looked at from two different angles: desire for what one does not have, and then attachment to what one already has. Okay, so desire can arise with reference to things in the past, to things in the future, to things in the present. So how can desire arise with reference to things in the past? Something in the past. Any ideas about this? Your youth, your health. Any other ideas? Things in the past. I don't have an answer myself. When I say that, when everybody thinks I'm trying to test them, and nobody is ready to answer. When I say I don't have a fixed idea myself, then I see hands are going up everywhere. Okay, so let's take whoever is closest to the microphone.
I mean, I can think of all sorts of things. I mean, yes, he said youth and health. One could be, oh God, I missed that opportunity, or oh, where did my, money go? Or maybe one regrets, lost friends, or, all sorts of things that could lead to, generation of action. It actually could also lead to wholesome if you looked at it in the right way. But in this instance, we're talking about, unwholesome.
Yeah.
So that could lead to bitterness or anger, depression, lethargy, letting oneself just be further defeated.
Yeah.
There's just all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, I think that was.
Where is my Volvo when I was in graduate school?
Why did I sell that Porsche?
My
Yeah,
1959 Volvo that I was using in 1971, 72, in excellent condition.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just, every one of those was perfect, and maybe they could just be summarized with loss and regret because you're attached. You're not free.
Yeah. Okay, any other ideas that different? Okay. So we have things, we could say thinking of things in the past with nostalgia, feelings of nostalgia. Maybe, okay, especially maybe in human relationships, somebody has a wife who's passed away, husband has passed away, and one thinks about all one's pleasant memories of the times with them, and then there's a kind of, I don't want to say desire and lust or desire and attachment, but it's a kind of clinging thoughts arise. And then thoughts about, okay, one's children have grown up and left the nest and gone out living their own life. And one starts thinking about, the times when I was a young parent and playing with my children and we had such good happy times together. And then I think back about the times when I used to go with my parents. We would go up to the country for summer vacation, and playing softball in the afternoon. So all of these, thinking of these with sort of nostalgic attachment and clinging. So that's things in the past. Okay, things in the future, of course, not so difficult to come up with examples. If things in the present, those are the things that we presently possess, that we hold to, and think about constantly with clinging and attachment to them. So I have this little computer I like so much, this recording device I like so much. Not much else, actually. But also what thinks about people, the people, one's friends, family members, with clinging and attachment. So this is the way the mind works, actually. If you look at the way the mind works, it's usually running away from the present into the past or into the future. Or if it is dwelling in the present, it's dwelling with attachment to objects in the present that one likes and seeks as a basis for enjoyment. Okay, so the text now continues. How does desire arise with reference to things in the past? Okay, so this one thinks about and mentally ponders things in the past that are the basis for, let's use the word like clinging and attachment. As one does so, desire arises. So of course one can't desire to acquire things that are already gone, that have vanished, but still there's that clinging and attachment that cannot be fulfilled because the objects of the past have gone. But when this desire springs up, one is fettered by those things because there's, the Buddha uses the expression, mental infatuation is there. He says, that is what I call the fetter. Let's see the Pali word that's used for mental infatuation. He uses the word chaitaso sarago. Okay, so chaitaso is of the mind, and sarago is actually an intensification of raga. I think originally the word is probably sangrago, but it's hard to say sangrag. The ung and the r sounds don't blend very easily. So what happens in Pali, as against Sanskrit, is that the A gets elongated. So this is an intensification of raga, of attachment. So that's why we use infatuation. So that mental infatuation or that strong attachment, that is what I call the fetter. Okay, so this is the way desire arises with reference to things in the past. And then how does desire arise with reference to things in the future? Okay, so one thinks about and ponders things in the future that are the basis for desire and attachment, for clinging and attachment. So as one does so, this desire arises. This we could see very clearly, that we're so often thinking about the future, hoping for, basing our hopes on the future. And then as we think about things in the future that we want for ourselves, then the desire arises for them. And then that desire, when that springs up, that becomes the fetter. Again, it's this mental infatuation that I call the fetter. And things in the present, again, the same pattern takes place. So the Buddha says, these are the three causes for the origination of karma. It seems a little strange here to be speaking about karma. Of course, the earlier part of the sutta is not so much concerned with the generation of karma, but with how bondage occurs through attachment, through misdirected thinking, and then from that pondering and thinking, there comes the arising of desire and attachment, and then through that attachment, there comes bondage. But the principal theme doesn't seem to be karma. But anyway, this is what the sutta says. Okay, then the next section of the sutta says that there are three other causes for the origination of karma. Okay, so in this case, desire does not arise with reference to things in the past that are the basis for attachment. Desire does not arise with reference to things in the future. Desire does not arise with reference to things in the present. Okay, so now comes the elaboration. How does desire not arise with reference to things in the past that are the basis for attachment? One understands the future result of things. Yeah, this is a rather complex passage, and there are different readings in the different recensions of the sutta. Okay, so one understands the future result of things in the past that are the basis for desire and lust. Having understood the future result, one avoids it. Having avoided it, one becomes dispassionate in mind, and having pierced through with wisdom, one sees. I have to say, I think that the text has been corrupted in such a way that we can't perfectly restore the original text. Okay, why do I say that? Okay, let us go take sentence by sentence. Okay, one understands the future result of things in the past that are the basis for desire and lust. Okay, the text uses the expression for the future result, ayating vipakam. So that is the karmic result of things in the past. I have to say, this doesn't make perfect sense to me. Maybe I'm going to, is it okay if I skip the rest of the sutta and move on to the next one? No? Okay, it seems like I'm confused today, but the text itself seems confused. Okay, having understood the future result, here the translation reads, one avoids it, because I'm basing this, I'm following here the Sri Lankan edition, which has abhinivajeti. Vajeti, the verb vajeti, means to avoid. Okay, but then the Ceylon text, the Sri Lankan text continues, tad abhinivajetva, having avoided that, cetasa abhivirajetva. So the verb here, this is the absolutive, abhivirajetva, is based on virajeti, which means putting an end to raga, putting an end to lust or to attachment. So with the mind, one makes the attachment fade away. Actually, that's not bad. Okay, the Burmese edition has tad abhinivateti, which means one puts a stop to that. Instead of having avoided that, one puts a stop to that. One puts an end to that. And then it has, having put an end to that, with the mind, one penetrates it. Instead of making attachment fade away or becoming detached from it, the Burmese edition has, one penetrates it, which is very, very different than the Roman script edition from the Pali Text Society has tad abhinivaddeti, which means that one increases that, one makes that grow, and then having made that grow, but I say that cannot be correct. Actually, this could be not so bad, actually, the Sri Lankan edition. Having avoided it, one becomes dispassionate with the mind, or one makes the attachment, one drops the attachment with the mind. Actually, that is good, not so bad. So having avoided it, one avoids. What does one avoid, though? Okay, desire does not arise with reference to things in the past that are that are the basis for desire and lust. One understands the future result of things in the past that are the basis for desire and lust. Having understood the future result, one avoids it. Maybe one avoids that future result. Having avoided it, one drops the attachment to the things in the past that are the basis for desire and lust. In that case, it makes sense. And then having pierced through with wisdom, one sees. How does one construe this? Having pierced it through with wisdom, one sees. There's not one right answer. How would you interpret? Just based on your own experience. One pierces through with wisdom, one sees. You have any ideas, Carolyn? Bowie? Somebody have the microphone?
Bhante, if we take avoided it, if we take it refers to desire and lust,
Yeah.
then having pierced through with wisdom, then pierced through desire and lust.
It could be, yeah. That could be, yeah. As I said, there's no right answer, and I'm not so sure that I understand the passage completely myself.
So that's
Okay.
Mahayana's
What is it?
stance.
Say again?
Mahayanist stance.
Mahayana stance. That what?
Having pierced through with wisdom the lust and desire and lust.
Yeah.
So the Burmese version also makes sense.
The Burmese version.
To pierce, just pierce through desire and lust.
Yeah. But
So
I think
although there is an existence of desire and lust, one
Yeah.
does not get attached to it. Just use wisdom.
Yeah, okay. Let's see what Andrea has to say.
Well, I have to think about how to articulate this. As you said, it may be a corrupted.
No, yeah.
It may be you said the translation or the sutta may be corrupted.
It's not the translation. Because there are different readings with different meanings.
Yeah, it could also be just, I'm just saying possibly, I don't know, I'm not pounding the table, on this. It could also just be very awkwardly stated, just possible, awkwardly written. I mean, I don't know.
Usually, when the Buddha speaks, it's usually very clear, rational.
Yeah, and these were also written many years, after.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately not necessarily straight from his mouth. But I'm just thinking logically, if one has insight and let's say one is looking past, because when I originally answered about, how can these, these incidents, in the past, bring up, karmic formations. And that can be a bad thing, but it could also be turned to the good, because if one was mindful and did look at whatever past actions, whether nostalgic or sad or angry or bitter, whatever they may be, and one could see the karmic results, the future results, which would be now in the present, because you're looking back at the past. And if you can go through and look at with wisdom and insight as to how they led you there, then hopefully that could lead one to disattachment from those.
Yeah, that's good.
It's hard to articulate.
Yeah, it's very good, yeah.
That's kind of what I meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else want to contribute that? Okay, you're wrong.
The sequence of things mentioned here reminded me of something that we studied in the you guys have to help me with the Sangyutta
Sangyutta
Agama.
In the Agama.
In the Chinese version.
The Chinese version of this sutta.
I don't think I don't know what the equivalent is, but it reminded me of sutras, multiple of them, that would mention the sequence of, and I don't know how we translate it into English. So in Chinese, the sequence would be yan, li yu, mie jing, ji jing fa. So yan seems to me could be avoiding, disliking it. Right? And li yu is dispassion. You want to
li yu.
Yeah. And then mie jing is cessation. And then ji jing fa is the final cessation, right? So
what is the last one?
I would say stillness.
No, in Chinese.
Ji jing fa. Let me get the correct terms. I was looking it up. Ji jing fa. 是名多闻. So this refers to the 5 aggregates. So it refers to all 5 aggregates.
Yeah.
So that we talk about. So it seems to me this makes sense if they just use different terms to refer to the same sequence of practice.
Yeah.
You have to. It says 于受想行识相厌离欲灭尽. So 受想行识, that's 5 aggregates. 相厌 meaning that I dislike it. I no longer like it. I do not take joys in it, right? And then dispassion, I want to get away from it.
Yeah.
And then it leads to the cessation. I guess the cessation, like Bo Hui said, is the desires and lusts.
Yeah.
And then, but so once you reach the cessation of desire and lust, isn't that a breakthrough wisdom? So rather than describing the state of what wisdom leads you to, it says you see.
Yeah, but the passage that you are referring to in the Agamas seems to be referring to like stages of higher attainment.
Leading to the final attainment.
Yeah. Whereas this...
But once you see, isn't that the beginning of the final attainment?
I'm not sure that this passage is actually referring to, I have to say it's not so clear to me. This seems to be just talking almost just in sort of practical, ordinary terms of how desire does not arise with reference to things in the past, the present, and the future. Not necessarily to the stages of attainment by which one is actually cutting off desire and lust.
Right, I think the difficulty here is to jump from becomes dispassionate in mind and all the way jump to pierce through with wisdom. How did I go from being dispassionate
Yeah.
to wisdom?
Yeah, you see, generally, we have a sequence that occurs a number of times in the Anguttara Nikaya, sometimes even in the Samyutta Nikaya, where it goes from samadhi to yatha bhuta jnana dasana, to knowing and seeing things as they really are. And that is followed by what I translate nibita, which I translate disenchantment. And then that is followed by, disenchantment is followed by viraga, by dispassion. And so dispassion comes after, quite a bit after knowing and seeing things as they are. But here we have, one becomes dispassionate in mind, as though dispassion comes before seeing with wisdom, which to me it's perplexing. So that makes me suspect that there's some corruption in the transmission of the text. Yeah, not so hard to imagine how that corruption can occur in passages which are not standardized, where you don't have a standardized sequence.
Is there a Chinese equivalent to this sutta?
Yeah, I didn't do a search into that. Let's just... This is 3, what is the number?
112.
Let's just do it this way. Yeah, I don't think so. What was the number again?
112.
Yeah, it doesn't seem so. Doesn't seem that there's a parallel. Okay, I think, let us see what comes next. Okay, the future. Okay, so let us move on to the next. This is actually a very important one, very short, but very, very important. And a little bit scary one. So if anybody gets frightened easily, you could, the way the newscasters say, the next report will be accompanied by some graphic images. So okay, so there are 3 who, if they do not abandon this particular behavior of theirs, they are bound for the plane of misery, bound for hell. So what are the 3? Okay, this is one who, though not, the Pali is a brahmachari, claims to be a brahmachari. So a brahmacharya is the observance of celibacy. So this is what it's saying, is that somebody who is presenting themselves as a proper monastic, one who is following the vow of presenting themselves as one who is following the vow of celibacy, is sort of secretly engaging in a sexual relationship. And so because the reason for this is not condemning sexual activity as evil or sinful in itself, as long as it takes place within the bounds of the 3rd precept, but one who undertakes the vow of celibacy and then presents themselves to the public as a brahmachari, one observing that pure precept, that precept of purity, then is by presenting oneself as the true celibate, one is presenting oneself as worthy to receive offerings from others. And so if one is violating that precept, then one is making a false claim to be a pure monastic. And that false claim to a monastic status is considered a very, very grave transgression. It's like being a complete hypocrite in regard to observance of the fundamental principle of the monastic life. Okay, so this is the first, and there's a sutta that occurs in the Buddha's, during an event that occurred during the Buddha's time. It's recorded in a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Eights. I think it's sutta number 20. Okay, so this is a time when the Buddha was sitting in the midst of the Sangha, and it was on the Uposatha day when the Buddha would recite not the Patimokkha that we have now, but he would give a kind of summary of the essential principles of the monastic life, what they call the Ovada Patimokkha, Sabapap, to abstain from all evil, to cultivate the good, to purify one's heart. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Okay, so Ananda, so during the first watch of the night, the Buddha and the Sangha just sat there silently. Then when the middle watch of the night came, Ananda came to the Buddha and said, "Bhante, it's getting late. Please recite the Patimokkha." The Buddha just kept silent. Then the hours go by. Later in the night, Ananda comes to the Buddha and says, "Bhante, please recite the Patimokkha. It's getting late." Still more time goes by. The Buddha keeps silent. Just the very end of the night, just before the morning comes, Ananda comes to the Buddha and says, "Bhante, recite the Patimokkha, it's getting late, no?" Then the Buddha says, "This assembly is impure. There's somebody sitting in this assembly," he says, "who is not celibate, but pretending to be celibate, who is not a samana, not a true ascetic, but claiming to be an ascetic. Somebody who is rotten, corrupt, depraved." Use a lot of very heavy adjectives to describe that person. But the Buddha doesn't point out who that person is. Then the Venerable Moggallana uses his psychic power to sort of scan the assembly to say who is the troublemaker in the midst of the assembly. Then Moggallana sees one person sitting there who he knows that is the person that the Buddha had in mind. So he gets up, Moggallana goes to that person and says, "Get out, friend. The Blessed One has seen you." But that person just continues to sit in the assembly. Then the second time, Moggallana says, "Get out. The Blessed One has seen you." But he just continues to sit there. A third time, the Buddha says, "Get out. The Buddha has seen you." He still goes on sitting there. Then Moggallana grabs him by the arm, lifts him out of his seat, pulls him out of the hall, ejects him from the hall, closes the door, and puts the bar across the door so he can't get back in. Then he comes to the Buddha and says, "Bhante, that person is gone. Please recite the Patimokkha." Okay, so that is the first of these heavy transgressions. The second, also very severe, very serious. One who slanders a pure brahmachari with the groundless charge of transgression. So this happens, sometimes there's a monastic who's very pure, very good in his behavior, and then there's a person, another monk, who is envious of that person and wants to knock that person down. And so he'll come to and make a false charge of that person is non-celibate in order to get them kicked out of the Sangha. And there's an incident that occurs in the Vinaya that there were a group of monks who had resentment against, there was one monk who had the responsibility for assigning the meals. You know, when lay people will come and make offering and want to offer a house meal to the Sangha, to get a number of monks sent to their home to make an offering to the Sangha. So there was one monk in charge of these assignments. Okay, so there was a householder who came to the Sangha and said, I want to have, let's just say, 5 monks at my house for the meal. Okay, so the turn came for these badly behaved monks to have their meal. And so this monk, what was his name? Dabba the Mala, assigned the 5 monks to this householder's house, and this householder knew that these were the bad monks, and so he gave them poor quality food. This is the way it comes in the Vinaya. Okay, so these monks thought that their fellow monk, Dabba the Mala, who assigned them, deliberately told the householder to give them bad food. And so these monks became resentful towards Dabba the Mala, and they wanted to knock him out from his position in the Sangha. But Dabba the Mala was actually an Arahat. And so how did these monks go about? Their plan was to charge him falsely with engaging in sexual activity. And yet they didn't want to tell a blatant lie, so it was a little bit coarse, a little bit vulgar, but I'll tell it what happened. Okay, they saw a couple of goats having engaged in sexual conduct. And so they named one of the goats Dabba the Mala. And so when they came back to the Sangha, then they told the other monks, we saw Dabba the Mala engaging in the sexual act. And so in this way, they tried to knock down and to depose Dabba the Mala from his position as a member of the Sangha by falsely charging him with sexual transgression. Of course, it backfired on them. Okay, but that is the background story for this. Okay, then the third ground is one holds the view that there is no fault in sensual pleasures and then falls into indulgence in sensual pleasures. So this is, by sensual pleasures here, it doesn't mean eating ice cream or listening to music, but it's a kind of placeholder for engaging in sexual activity. And this is referring not to householders, to lay people who can have sexual relations within the bounds of the third precept. But this is holding a view that there's no fault if monastic persons engage in sexual activities. And then based on that view, then they themselves indulge in sensual pleasures. And so that is propounding what would be for the Buddha a false view, a wrong view. Okay, so those 3, if they do not abandon this fault of theirs, so it doesn't mean that they're necessarily just by engaging in these actions, but they can abandon their faults. So somebody who has been falsely claiming to be celibate, if he recognizes his wrong deed, and then makes a confession of this and repents for it, of course they still gain unwholesome karma, but it's not necessarily going to lead to the plane of misery if they truly have remorse for that. Similarly, for one who charges a pure person with non-celibacy, if they make a confession and repent, they can sort of uplift or emerge from the full gravity of that offense. And similarly with the third transgression. But if they continue to hold on to that type of behavior and don't abandon it, then those actions will lead to the plane of misery, even to hell. Okay, I think we have to end for the morning and then come back, we'll say 12:15 for questions. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Oh, before this, let me remind people that we have the Abhidhamma retreat coming up end of August. And if you want to get a place and you haven't registered yet, you'd better register because it will start to fill up. Already it's filling up. There are about 60 people registered so far, and often people register last week, but better to hold your place now. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Jabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhuta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Sata Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. Okay, you can stand up and then with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Okay. So, I saw the ambulance came.